Once you're clear about the strategy for your book, including whom you're writing it for, the central question your book will answer, and your solution or answer to that central question, and you've developed a detailed outline of what you'll write, or your book blueprint, it's finally time to get writing. In this video, I'll give you some tips and tricks for setting up and formatting your manuscript so that it's easy to use and navigate while you write, revise, and self-edit. If you set up your manuscript the way I'll show you, your editor and your designer will love you for it. What's more, you'll save time and effort too. Ready? Let's get started. Okay, I'm not going to get into a review or comparison of text editors or word processing software in this video, but what I will say is this. When you send your manuscript for publishing and professional editing, you'll almost certainly be expected to submit it as a Microsoft Word file. So, if you're not using Word, make sure that whatever tool you are using can output a Word file. The other thing that you should make sure that your text editor supports is styles. Now, these may be called something else in other software. They're called paragraph styles in Google Docs, for example. But what styles let you do is define different formatting rules for different parts of your manuscript, like a specific combination of font, text size, color, and so on, and then apply those styles consistently throughout your document. We'll come back to styles later, but they really are key to this whole business of manuscript preparation. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'll assume that you're using Word. As you'll also see, I'm using Word on a Windows-based PC. If you're on a Mac, a few things like keyboard shortcuts, for example, may be a little bit different, but those differences should be minimal, so you should have no problem following along. So, let's open up Microsoft Word and get started. I'll see you there. All right, here we are in Word. There's nothing like a blank page to kind of make you want to freeze up, isn't there? Now, before you start writing, I want you to set up your workspace within Word to make it easier to write. You need a writing environment that's conducive to writing, and there are also some parts of the user interface that I want to make sure that you're aware of and that you know how to use. This isn't going to be a tutorial on Word, but it's going to be a little bit of a primer on the key things that you want to be aware of when you're writing your manuscript. So, first things first. I'd like you to set up a project folder, and this can just be a folder anywhere on your hard drive. I've just called it Book Manuscript, and I've put it on my desktop, and then within that I've got 3 folders. I have an archive folder, and that's just where I put old versions of files that I'm probably not going to use again, but I may want to go back to. I've got a research folder. I just use that to keep documents that I want to reference for writing, and then a visuals folder, and that's where I keep images that I'm going to be placing into my manuscript. Those might be diagrams or illustrations or photos and things like that. So if you set all of that up, and then the next thing that I want you to do is save your file into that folder. I've already done that. I've saved this, just called it book title and then today's date. And by doing that, it just means that the file's already committed to your drive, and as you add content to it, you can just regularly save and make sure that you don't lose any of your valuable content. Okay, so project folder we've got set, we've saved our file. Now, the first thing that I want to show you is the navigation pane. And if you're not familiar with working with Word a whole lot, then you might not be familiar with the navigation pane. If you just go up to View in the top bar here, and then there you'll find under Show, Navigation Pane. And we're just going to tick the box there, and that's going to bring up on the left-hand side the navigation pane. The first 2 are the ones that are most interesting, headings and pages. So we don't have any headings yet, but pages, obviously we can see our first page. The pages are useful, but I really find headings to be most useful, and you'll see why a little bit later on. The other thing I want to show you before we get into things, most people are probably aware of this, but commenting. Comments can be very useful for leaving notes for your editor or your designer. They don't form part of the manuscript itself, but they are visible to whoever is accessing it. And so by just going to Review, New Comment, or you can simply right-click on the text that you want to apply it to and click New Comment. And then you can just add a note. So that's just an easy way to add some annotations to your document. The other thing I'll show you here, you can turn those off. You can turn the visibility off. Just further down from comments on the review tab, under tracking, show markup, you can just toggle comments on or off. That way, if you don't want to see them, they go away, but they're still saved with the document. So at any point, you can go back and just turn those on. So that can be helpful as well. I'm just going to delete that. Okay, now the other thing that's quite important, and we're going to use these a lot, are styles. I mentioned styles to you earlier. You can find styles up here on the Home tab, right around the middle, and you can see there are a whole bunch of different ones. If you click here, it'll expand, and you can see all of these different styles, and I'm going to show you how to use those very shortly, but just so that you're aware of where they are. So getting into styles, there are a few modifications that I like to make when I first created a manuscript that I'm going to be working on. I don't make a lot of changes, but there are a few things that I think you're going to find useful. And the first thing I like to do is right-click on the normal style and click Modify. And rather than Calibri, which tends to be the default, I just change that to Times New Roman 12 point. And then I also go to Format, Paragraph. Then I change line spacing to double. That makes your default text double spaced. That's useful, particularly when you print your manuscript out and you're reading it, you're making notes on it. It gives you a little bit of space to add notes between lines. And it also just makes things easier to read. So I encourage you to do that. The other thing that I do is I add a couple of additional styles. So if we click on that down button again and create a style, I call the first style Epigraph, and I'll talk more about what that is later, and click Modify, and I just make that italics and click OK. So you'll see we now have that additional style up here, and then I'm going to create another one, create a style, and I call that Epigraph Attribution, and Modify, and I make that bold, click OK. Actually, the other thing we can do, if we right-click on the epigraph style and click Modify, then we can change style for following paragraph. We can change that to Epigraph Attribution. Now, quickly, what an epigraph is, you'll often see at the beginning of chapters, for example, in books, you'll see a quote, perhaps, a famous quote that relates to the topic of that chapter. And it's helpful to have a different style for that. You know, this is a quote. Now that's using our epigraph attribution style right now. So we'll change that to epigraph and quote by someone. And so that's just an easy way when you create those, you can just then apply the epigraph style to the epigraph and the epigraph attribution to the line underneath it. And you can also use those for testimonials, for example, at the start of the book. So that I just find that's helpful to add right up front. The other thing that I like to do is go to the quote style and modify that. The default quote style, and you'll see block quotes in books, and that's when you have a long quote that's more than, say, 3 or 4 lines, and you know, typically the formatting is treated a little bit different. It's indented on either side, but the default in Word is to center that. I like to just align that to the left, but as you'll see there, it's still indented on either side. So that's another modification that I like to make. Okay, next I'm going to click on normal. When I click on normal, that means that the text here is using the normal style. And I'm just going to copy paste a bunch of lines here. Actually, you know what? What I'm going to do, it can be helpful when you're working on stuff like this to get some text to work with. If you type into Google lorem ipsum, you'll get a list of what's called lorem ipsum generators. Lorem ipsum, it's just type that doesn't really mean anything. It's spaced the way type normally is, and so it's very helpful to be able to create a bunch of paragraphs of text. So I'm going to do 5 paragraphs, click generate, and you can see what it's done now is it's created a whole bunch of type that I can just copy and paste into my document. So I select that, copy, go back into the Word document, and I'll select all and paste that in. And I'm just going to get rid of these spaces in between. Now, the reason I did that is now I'm going to create another style, and this one is going to be called normal secondary. And I'm going to click on modify, click on the format button down at the bottom, click on paragraph, and up here where under indentation where it says special, I'm going to click on the down arrow where it says first line. I'll choose first line, and then under by I'm going to put 1/4 inch. That's about 5 millimeters for those of you that are working in metric. And I'll just click OK and OK. So you'll see it's actually applied it to this paragraph. I'm going to apply it to all of the other paragraphs here just to show you what it does. So you'll see these are all using the normal style. If I click normal secondary, what it does is it indents the first line of the paragraph. And the reason that I do this is in a book you'll find that the first paragraph of each section doesn't have a first line indent, but all of the subsequent ones do until you get to another topic, and under the heading it'll start without the first paragraph indent. And so it's not critical that you do that, but I find it's helpful because the reason that we do it when we're laying out a book is that it makes it easier to read. So here you can clearly see where the paragraphs start without having to add a space in between paragraphs. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And then the last set of modifications that I like to do is for headings. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple ways to do this. So for heading 1, I'm going to go up here, I'm going to right click, modify, go to format, paragraph, and I'm just going to add some additional space before it. So 18, or I usually go 24, and click OK. Click OK. So what that does is it just adds a little bit more space before the heading, just so that there's a clear demarcation between the end of the previous section and there. Now, I said I was going to show you another way to do that. This is what I usually do because it's quicker. I'll select the text, go up to layout, and then you can just increase it here. And so you can actually see the impact of that right away. And then I go back to home and I'll right click on heading 2 and go update heading 2 to match selection. And so that's a quicker way to do it. Same outcome, but I prefer that way, to be honest. And I'll do the same with heading 3 as well. Go to layout, bump that up to 24, go back to home, and update heading 3 to match selection. Okay, so those are really the modifications that I do to the styles. A few other things to do to set up our file. Page numbers. So we're going to add page numbers to the bottom of the page. And to do that, we're going to go to Insert, Page Number over here under Header and Footer. Just click the down arrow by page number. Put it at the bottom of the page. And I like to use plain number 2. It doesn't really matter that much, but plain number 2 puts it right in the middle, which I like. So you can see that's in the footer, and then we just double click to get back into the body of our document. Now this should be set up automatically, but let's go to our layout tab and just make sure that our margins under page setup are set to 1-inch margins all around. That just, again, makes it very easy, particularly when you print your manuscript out, so that you have space along the sides and along the top and bottom to make notes. Okay, so we've made our workspace a bit more comfortable to work in. Next, we're going to build the skeleton of our document. So I'm going to delete everything that we've done here. And again, we're left with a blank document. Now what we're going to do is rough in the key parts of your manuscript. And by doing this, you'll have kind of the core structure of your manuscript in place, both in your file, and it also helps you kind of get that solidified in your mind as well. And you'll find it much easier to navigate around, to jump in and out and around your document as you write your first draft. Now, everybody's manuscript is going to be a little bit different. You'll have different components to it. The structure will be a little bit different. But here we're going to set up what I consider to be a typical manuscript structure. And then we can talk about some variations a little bit later as well. So let's start by adding all of the key sections of the book. And we're going to put these all on separate lines. So title page is what we always start with. Next is the copyright page, or also known as the imprint page. Often people will put in testimonials if they have quotes from people who've read an early version of the book. Of course, there's the contents page. Sometimes there's a preface or a foreword, not forward, W-O-R-D, forward. Then the introduction will then have chapter 1, chapter 2, and then I'm just going to call this chapter N, because So you don't know how many chapters we have. Then after that, we have our conclusion, perhaps some acknowledgements, maybe about the author. Now, some people put about the author up front in what's called the front matter. I like to put it in the back in what's called the back matter, simply so that we get the reader in to the main meat of the book quicker. And then you might have some appendix. Now, while it's not part of your manuscript, I encourage you to also add back cover description and back cover bio. And this will be a reminder to you to take a stab at writing your back cover description and a short bio, kind of a 40 to 50 word bio that often goes on the back of the book. If you don't put them in at this stage, then you'll probably forget to include them. And too often we have these coming in after, say, a second round edit, or even worse yet, after the proofread, or design begins and we don't have these elements. So if you put it in now, you take a stab at it. That way your editor can take a look at it, and you're all set. Okay, so we've got all of these, the kind of the overall structure. The other thing that we'll do is we'll name our chapters. So chapter 1, this is the title of this chapter, and we'll just use that same title for each of these. You might have titles for your introduction and conclusion as well. We'll just leave them as they are for now. Okay, I'm putting my cursor after title page, and I'm going to hold down Control and hit Enter. The other thing you can do here is go to Insert on the top ribbon and then just enter a page break. So if we go back up here, so now our title page is on its own line. Now on your title page, all that should be there is the main title of your book, your book's subtitle, which is usually longer, and your name, author be named. Now select your main title, go to the Home tab, and we'll choose from the Styles title. We're going to select your subtitle, and we're going to make that subtitle. And we can use subtitle as well for the author's name. And you can just leave it like that. You really don't need anything else there. So let's go to our second page. All right, so now we're left with everything else. So we're just going to delete that first line there, and we're going to select everything here. And now we're going to go back up here to the styles, and we're going to choose heading 1. So heading 1 has now been applied to all of the sections of our book, and here's what I want you to see. Now on the left-hand side in our navigation pane, you can see that all of these different sections now form the top level items within our manuscript. And now what we can do is just before each of these, let's start down at the bottom. That sometimes makes it easier. Just before the back cover bio, I'm going to place my cursor, and instead of going up to insert page break, I'm just going to hit Control and Enter, and that has the same effect. And we're going to do that for each of these. And what that does is it just puts each section on a different, starts each section on a new page, and that's what we want. We want your manuscript to have a fresh page when you start each section. Okay, so there we go. Now your copyright page, there's really nothing you need to do there. Your publisher is going to add everything that you need for your copyright page. So you can just leave that blank. If you're leaving something blank, it can be a good idea to just write intentionally blank, just so that there's no confusion. And it can be useful to highlight that too. Now, if you've approached planning your book the way I outlined in Entrepreneur to Author by creating a book blueprint, then what you'll be able to do now is you'll be able to take your book blueprint. You might have an outline alternatively, and you'll be able to then go into each of these chapters or each of these sections and add in your topics and your subtopics to take this structure down to the next level. So to do that, now, because we've been using styles, and because we have our navigation pane open, it's very easy. So we can just go into, for example, chapter 1. Then we can add, let's say we have, this is my first topic. This is my second topic. And now a third, a fourth topic. And now in summary, that'll be the conclusion of this chapter. And then you might have within your topic, subtopic, another subtopic. And now, just like we did for the main levels, we can select these and apply, instead of heading 1, apply heading 2 and heading 3 for the next one down. You've even got a heading 4. I don't like to go too much deeper than 3 headings, but if you need to, in fact in my book I did. I went down to I think 4 levels of headings, and we'll apply heading 2 to these. Now you know what I'm going to do here? I'm going to make another modification, because you can see, so in our navigation the structure is very clear, right? The hierarchy is very clear. When we're looking at it on the screen, it's a little bit tough to differentiate between headings 3 and 4 in particular. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make some modifications to our styles, and you'll see, actually before I do that, you got to be careful. When I went in, I was going to go and make a modification to heading 1, but I had this, or my cursor was in here. What that can do is it can actually change the style of this to heading 1. So when you're making a change, that's another reason why sometimes it's useful to use the alternative method that I showed you. You select something that is in style 1, and then I'm going to, for example, make it bold, maybe make it 18 points, and now I'll right click and choose update heading 1 to match the selection. Now I'm going to do the same for heading 2. I'm going to make it bold, maybe make it 14 points, and apply that, or update that rather. You can see how even though I just applied it to that one, it's now updated all of those. And then I can select one of these. Actually, I'll probably leave that the way it is, because that's nicely differentiated from those two. And you'll see if we did use 4, that one's italics, so that'll be noticeable as well. Okay, so now we've got, a nice hierarchy, at least within chapter 1, and you could go and do the same with all of your chapters. You might have subtopics and sub-subtopics in your introduction and conclusion potentially. Now, I'm going to remind you right now to save, right? There's nothing worse than doing a lot of work and then having your computer crash and then you lose a bunch of your work. So we're going to save now. But look how easy it is to navigate around. If I wanted to jump down to the conclusion, very easy to do that. And then if I want to go back to the testimonials, I just click on that and I jump all the way up there and then back to chapter 1. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to continue to build out the structure of all the other chapters, and then I'm going to drop in some of that lorem ipsum text so that we have something to work with. And then I'll show you how to best add to your document, add your content, both written and visual, and how to format how to work with it. So I'm not going to bore you with, as I add all of these sections and subtopics and text. I'm going to go do that, and then I'll meet you back here. Okay, we're back. So now we've got a pretty well populated manuscript here. So copyright is still not populated, but we've got text in our testimonials. Actually, what I was going to do, and this may be a good time to show you this. So let's say we've got 3 testimonials. Let's just add first name, last name, president of company. So now we can use our epigraph and our epigraph attribution. I'll just copy that, apply that, apply that. Okay, so now we've got 3 testimonials there. And what I would probably do is I would just, gives a little bit of space in between them. I would change the epigraph attribution and then update that. And you can see it updates them all there. Okay, so we've got our testimonials. These are probably quotes, so those will usually have quotation marks. And then we don't have a contents page yet. I'm going to show you how to create that, but first I'll just show you the rest of the document here. Okay, somebody wrote a preface for us, or we wrote a foreword. You're not going to have both of these. You may not even have a preface or a foreword. In my book, I didn't. Instead, I just kind of included everything in the introduction. That's probably a good approach for most people. But if you do have a foreword written by somebody that's well known by your audience, it can be a great place to put that right before there. So let's assume that this book has a foreword, but not a preface. And then after that, we jump right in with our introduction and then into chapter 1. Okay, so you can see we've got a really robust structure now in our navigation pane. And what's great is because we've used headings 1, headings 2, headings 3, these are all hierarchical. And you see these little arrows, we can now collapse those. When we're working on, say, a particular section, we can collapse the sections that we're not working on. So yeah, now it's just really easy to navigate around. We've got our about the author down here at the bottom. We've even got our back cover description and our bio so that our editor can take a look. Okay, so I was going to show you, if we go up to contents, this is the other reason why using styles is such a great idea. So we can now go up to our content section and just put our cursor in the line right underneath the title page. And now we can just go to References. Under Table of Contents, just click the little down arrow here. I'll typically do Custom Table of Contents. There are some built-in ones, but they don't really give the right result. So now what we can do is indicate how many levels we want in our contents table. If you want it very simple, then you would just do one level. And then if you click OK, voila, there you have your table of contents, and it's automatically populated page numbers. Now check this out. Let's say we go down to our conclusion and we decided that there's a bunch of content that we forgot to include, and we end up writing more. So right now the acknowledgements start on page 24, but now because we've added content, all of our page numbers have been messed up. That's okay. Now we go up to Contents page and we right click anywhere in there and choose Update Field. And it's going to ask us if we want to update just the page numbers or the entire table. You know, if none of your titles have changed, then you could just do page numbers only. Otherwise, update the entire table and it'll update all of the section titles as well as the page numbers. So we'll just do page numbers and click OK. And watch down here. You see, it's all updated. And that's all because we've used styles. Now, I've copy-pasted a lot of dummy text in here, but now I want to walk through with you a few things to bear in mind as you're writing. So let's just jump into chapter 1 here. Like I talked about earlier, just to make things easier to read, I've used as the first paragraph in every section. There you see the first paragraph. I've used the normal style. And then for the subsequent paragraphs, I've used that normal secondary that we created, if you'll recall, that has the indent in the first one right up there. So that's a good habit to get into. It's not critical. If you just want to use the normal one, then what I would encourage you to do is update that first line. Actually, let's do that now just so I can show you. But I'll also show you why I don't like to do that. So if we were to go in and add that first line indent to our normal style and click OK, then all of our paragraphs will be indented by that 1/4 inch. That's not a problem. The reason that I like to create multiple ones is that the headings actually use the normal style as their starting point, and then they layer on top of that. And so what you'll find if we were to do that, you'll see all of our headings are now also indented by a 1/4 inch. And it doesn't look great. It's not the end of the world, but that's the reason that I create those two styles. So I'm going to undo that modification to the normal style, but I just wanted to show that to you so that you were aware of why we did that. Okay, so we're back to chapter 1. Now a few watch-outs or words of guidance. So it's best practice to not add line breaks after each paragraph. So for example, like this. And again, that's another reason why we create those two, the normal style, and then we create the normal secondary, because when you don't have a line between the two, it's really helpful to have that indent there. Otherwise, you've got blocks of text all lined up along the left-hand side, and then you feel like you have to put the line break in between the paragraphs so that you can see where the paragraphs start and end. But the problem is then your designer has to go in and strip all of those out anyway when he or she is designing the interior of your book. So that's the rationale for that. Another thing is just put one space after punctuation, so one space after a period. There are a lot of people who put two spaces after a period, and this comes from back probably 20, 30 years ago. The printing and display on computers wasn't nearly as nuanced as they are today, and having two spaces, and in fact typewriters as well, back when people used typewriters, having two spaces made it very clear where there was a break between sentences. That's where that convention came from. Now we don't need to do that, and adding extra spaces it now kind of looks weird in a manuscript. So take those out. If you don't, your designer's going to have to do that, or your editor's going to have to do that, and that's not a great use of their time. Their time's much better spent making your book read and look much, much better. Another thing, don't use tabs in the middle of paragraphs like this. There's really no need to do that, and it just throws all the text out. Also, don't use soft line breaks. So by that I mean at the end of a sentence you might put hold down shift and hit enter, and that keeps everything as one paragraph, but it creates a soft line break. Again, that's something that's going to drive your designer bonkers, so avoid doing that. Another thing that we sometimes see is when there's a really long word, or actually, we often see it when there's a URL, And so what people will often do is they'll create one of those line breaks just to break it up a little. Or they might put a, let's get rid of some of these words. Often people don't like to see this extra white space there, and so what they'll do is they'll put a soft break like that, or they'll, if it's a word and not a URL, they might put a hyphen in like that. Again, don't do it. Yeah, it doesn't look pretty the way it is, but your designer is going to deal with all of that. Your designer is going to apply hyphenation rules and take care of line breaks that leave too much white space and things like that. Just leave it as it is. This is not how your book is going to look when it's laid out. What we do is we bring it all into a purpose-built software package and lay your book out, design it in there. So this is really, your manuscript is just to get your ideas out on the page and make it easy for your editor to edit it. For emphasis, sometimes you want to emphasize certain words. Things that you shouldn't do, don't use underlines. They're just not seen in professionally published books. In fact, back before computers were common for publishing, underlines like that were actually used to indicate that italics were going to be used or were needed for a particular word. Now we just really don't use underlines in professional publishing, so don't do that. Also, avoid all caps for the purposes of emphasis. There may be instances where you use all caps if it's an acronym, or there are very specific instances where it might be appropriate, but don't use it for emphasis. If you want to emphasize a word, use italics. Right, so your italics up there. That's what we consider a soft emphasis. For a heavy emphasis, you can use bold. But in both of these instances, use them sparingly. If everything's emphasized, then nothing's emphasized. So use them sparingly, use them only when necessary, and restrict yourself to use of italics for soft emphasis and bold for a heavier emphasis. Okay, the next thing is lists. So we've got two types of lists, right? We've got ordered lists, otherwise known as numbered lists, and we have unordered lists, otherwise known as bulleted lists. Sometimes people use them interchangeably, but that's really not the right approach. So you should only use a numbered list when the order of the items in the list is important, or if you intend to reference items in those lists in the rest of the text, and so you need a number to make reference to. If neither of those situations applies, then it's best practice to use a bulleted list. And the way to do that is, let's just get a few lines here. So what you want to do is use the function built into Word for your lists. Just highlight them and click on bullets, or alternatively, click on your numbered lists, just like that. And that'll make it nice and easy for your designer to use. I also suggest, so sometimes you might have nested lists. So you have lists with subpoints underneath them. To do that, two things you can do. So at the end of an item, hit enter. That adds a new list item. And you can just use these buttons up here to indent to the next level. And I recommend only trying to stick as much as possible to 2 levels in your lists. It gets tricky from a layout perspective. It just starts to look messy if you have more than 2 levels in your lists. Okay, another thing that I want to talk about are callouts. So often an author wants to emphasize a certain part of the text. So a callout is actually part of the text. If somebody's reading through, you really want them to read the words in the callout in the order that it appears. So for example, let's say that this sentence here was something that you really wanted your reader to take away and notice, but you want them to be reading this paragraph. You want them to read directly into this paragraph and then continue on there. So the way that we do that is with a callout, and a callout is simply different formatting that really draws the reader's attention, and so we format it in a different way. And the way to indicate that to your designer and to your editor is to highlight that and then apply a different style. And I recommend just using one of the built-in styles in Word called intense quotation. If we choose that, you'll see how it treats it. And that doesn't mean that's exactly how it's going to look in your book, but that tells the designer that they need to come up with a style that fits with the rest of your design for formatting these callouts. So that's a callout. Now, by contrast, I talked about this a little bit earlier, you may have quotes that are longer than usually 3 or 4 lines. So let's take an example. Let's say from here to here, we have a long, maybe an excerpt from a paper or a long quote from a speech or something like that. Just select that. The way to indicate a quote like that is to choose the quote style. And that's the one that we modified early on. Just click on that and you'll see that defines it very nicely as what's called a block quote. Now let's talk about some things that you might want to add to your book, like perhaps a table. For tables, if it's a simple table like with text or numbers in it, I'd encourage you just to use the table feature within Word. To do that, we just start on a new line, go up to Insert, Table, and you just choose how many rows and columns you need. Make sure that you always include an extra row or column if you need headers. And then for your headers, we've just got whatever you want to call that, column A. Just paste that in. And a few rows. So for these, all you got to do, just bold them. You really don't need to do anything more than that. Your designer will see that that's a table and they'll come up with something that's a lot more attractive that fits with your overall design. Get some actual text in there, some actual fake text. There we go. Simple as that, right? Or it might be numbers or dollar figures. The key is just keep the formatting nice and simple. Another thing that you might use in your manuscript is what's called a breakout box. A breakout box is in some ways similar to a call-out, except that it kind of pulls the reader away from the main flow of the text. The reader doesn't have to read at any particular time. It's often used for things like case studies or definitions or little trivia or facts about the topic that you're discussing. And they're often seen in like a shaded box or a box that has a border around it or something like that. For these, again, keep it really simple. Don't try to format them. That's just something that your designer is going to have to remove anyway. So for a breakout box, what I suggest is just on a new line. I would usually include it at the end of a section, again, because you don't want to interrupt the flow. And I put 3 stars. I type breakout box, 3 more stars, 3 stars, end breakout box, 3 more stars. And then whatever the content of your breakout box needs to be, you can just put that in between those 2 bookends. That's all you need to do. If you want to make it really stand out, you can highlight it like that. But beyond that, just keep it simple. That way your designer knows, okay, this is something that I need to treat differently, and they'll come up with a specific style for that. Okay, we talked about epigraphs earlier on, and we used our epigraph styles that we created for our testimonials. I'll just show you how we use that at the start of a chapter, for example, as people often do. So let's say that these first 2 sentences are actually a quote. And then let's say that the person who wrote that was vestibulum ante. So now, again, that's just at the start of your chapter. So put our cursor in there. We'll apply the epigraph style and the epigraph attribution style that we created. There we go. That's all you need to do. Your designer will pick that up and will design that appropriately for the look and feel of your book. Okay, the next thing that you might have, or you might not, you don't have to, a lot of books don't have them, are visuals, photos, diagrams, illustrations, charts, graphs. And let's drop something in somewhere around here, near where our table is, because I'm going to want to show you something related to the table too, related to the table and the visual. Okay, so wherever that visual element needs to go, just create a new line, go up to Insert, Pictures, and find it on your device. Now, when you provide your manuscript, it's really helpful if you have publish-ready visuals ready to go. Those need to be about 300 dots per inch, 300 pixels per inch or higher. They need to be high quality in terms of the look and the feel, but it's a good idea to include those in your manuscript, not because they're going to be laid out that way, but because it's helpful so that the editor and the designer can see where the visuals need to appear in the manuscript, and then also so that your editor can look at any text that appears in those visuals and can proofread them, edit them, make sure that they work grammatically and with the rest of the content. So I'll show you how to do that. So in our visuals folder, I'm going to choose a 3-act story structure. I'm going to insert that in there. Okay, there we go. So you can see there's a lot of text in here, and I would want my editor to take a look at that as part of the edit. So I'm including that in there. Now, because this image is actually high resolution, I actually don't need it to be high resolution in the Word document. The designer will need it as a high resolution file to bring into the design software so that it prints at high enough resolution. But for purposes of the manuscript, I'm just going to select the image, go up to Picture Format, and then up here under Adjust, we'll see Compress Pictures. And you can just click on that. That's going to bring up a dialog box, and we'll be able to change the resolution. I usually just use email, 96 pixels per inch. That keeps the document size nice and small. Click OK. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit to see if if the text is still legible. You can see it's a little bit grainy, so I'm actually going to undo that. Click Compress Pictures again. And this time I'm going to choose Web, 150 pixels per inch. That'll be a little bit better resolution, but it'll still give us some savings in terms of file size. There we go, and that's nice and legible. Okay, so we have a visual here. We have a table above. Now, for tables and visuals, sometimes referred to as figures, you'll usually or often you'll want a caption to go along with these. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Just select the visual, go up to References. You'll see a caption section. Just click Insert Caption. Now, this dialog box that comes up is your caption dialog box. So you'll see it's already put figure 1. Then just put like a colon and call it whatever you want to call it. This was 3-act story structure. Now, under label, you see figure. That's what we want to use here because this is a diagram or an illustration. I'm going to do another one with our table, but you'll see under label here, you can choose from figure or table, even equation. We rarely use that except for academic titles. So we're going to leave that at figure for this. You can put it below or above. I like to put them above. So that way, if you also have, for example, a note, like a source or something that you want to apply to a particular visual, then you can still then apply that, again, apply another caption and apply that below. That way you have that flexibility. So I'll typically choose above, and we just click OK. And you can see it's put it up there. And your designer will then take that and design a style for your captions that'll be consistent. You don't have to change that at all, just leave it like that. So let's go up to our table just up here. And similarly, we just select the table using the little icon that appears at the top. And instead of going up here, another way to do it is just right click in there and choose Insert Caption. So this time under label, we're going to choose table 1, and then again, here we'll put whatever we want to call the caption here. This is a table. All right, and the great thing about using the caption feature like this is it keeps track of them, right? So now if we go into this next section and we add another visual, let's add our title analysis. If we insert a caption here, we choose figure, and you see it's automatically keeping track that now the next one that we've put in here is actually figure 2. And now let's say after our first edit in revisions, the editor says you could really use a visual up earlier in the manuscript. We can add that, and it's actually going to increment the current figure 2. It's going to make that figure 3, and everything will just flow through. Now, by inserting your captions the way we did, often an author will want to make reference to a figure or a table in the body of the text. So for example, in here, you might write something like, as you can see in figure 2, and then whatever you want to say about it. So that's fine, but the problem now is that in that scenario before where you now went in and you added another figure earlier on, this is now going to become figure 3, and now this isn't going to match up. You could just change it manually, but what if you forgot to do that? So instead of hard coding that in, because we've used the caption feature, we can just delete that and we can make that dynamic. So the way to do that is to go up to References, and in the caption section, click on Cross-Reference. And our cross-reference dialog comes up, and there are 3 things to do here. First, we want to choose the reference type, and this goes back to figure versus table. So in this case, we want to make reference to figure 2. So we're going to leave it at figure, but if you were referencing table 2 or table 1 earlier, then you could choose table from there. So we're going to leave that on figure. Insert reference to. This is about what is going to be inserted into your text, and in this case, we don't want the entire caption. We only want label and number. And then for which caption? And we want to make reference to figure 2, title analysis, so we choose that. And now we click Insert. And you can see it's put it in there. We're going to need to go back and put a space in there, but it's there. And we can click Close now. So let's add our space. So now you can see this is highlighted in gray. And what that indicates is that it's a dynamic link. The other thing that's really useful about this, if you set it up this way, we can maintain those links when we create the ebook. That will insert hyperlinks into your ebook, so that makes it very easy for readers to navigate through your book. And so let me show you this now. So let's say that in the edit, your editor says you know what, this graphic is too complicated. I don't think you need it. Let's just get rid of that. So we're going to delete that. You can see this still says figure 2, but like we did with the contents page, we can now just right click on that and update field. So now that's updated to figure 1. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do this a different way. I'm going to undo that because that still depends on you remembering to do all of that, right? Instead, what we're going to do is select all, and then we're going to hit F9. That's going to update your table of contents as well. We're just going to update page numbers, and you'll see it's also updated our caption. This is now figure 1 instead of figure 2, and we can see that our reference to it in the text also updated. So that's great. That's a really great way to make sure that all of your references continue to match up and that you don't get, it doesn't get all confused and messed up as you're making changes. Now, another thing that you might want to add are notes. And there are really two types of notes. There are footnotes and endnotes. They can be used more or less interchangeably. I often prefer to use endnotes just because it doesn't interrupt the flow of the book, but some people prefer footnotes. Both are equally easy to do. I really strongly suggest that you use the built-in feature in Word to do that, because it's going to, just like it does for the figures and tables and the captions, it's going to keep track of all of those. So as you make changes, as things get deleted and move around, everything's going to stay up to date. So you just put your cursor where you want your note reference to go. And that's usually, you put those right after a punctuation mark, not before the period right here. We put it after the period, and just click Insert Footnote. What I like to do is treat everything as a footnote while I'm writing, and then it's very easy to then convert all of your footnotes to endnotes later on. As I'm writing, it's useful to be able to see it right on the page where the reference shows up, and then before submitting the manuscript, you can always convert it to endnotes, and I'll show you how to do that. So here's our first footnote. I'm just going to put, this is a note, and then let's go down into chapter 2 maybe. Perhaps we have another one at the end here. So to insert your footnote, it's just, again, on the References tab, just under Footnotes, just click Insert Footnote. It's going to add one to the bottom, type what your note needs to be. And so what we can see is, let's say during edit or when we're self-editing, we decide, you know what, I really need to add something up here. We can insert another note. So now this is footnote 2, and the one that we created before now becomes footnote 3. And it's updated at the bottom as well. So later on, if you did want to change those over, just up here by the footnotes, you just click on this little box with the arrow to bring up the footnote and endnote dialog box. And make sure you have footnotes selected, and you can just click Convert all footnotes to endnotes, and then click Close. So now you can see all of those footnotes that appeared in various pages throughout, they've now been pushed down to the back after everything else. So it's appearing right after the cover bio. What you might want to do in that case is do Control Enter to put it on a new page, and then call this Notes. And I'm going to apply our heading 1. So now that's just another section now, and you can see it appears right there. Very easy. But of course, if you want to go back and turn those back into footnotes, it's very easy to do that as well. Just go back up to References, open up the Footnotes, Endnotes dialog box. This time click on Endnotes because we want to make a change to how the endnotes are treated. Click Convert, and now convert all endnotes to footnotes. And click OK, close, and here we go. So there's our footnote 3 reference, and there it's a footnote again. Now again, it's a good time to remind everybody, click Save. You will thank yourself for it. Okay. Now, I think we can leave it there. I hope you get the idea that what we're trying to do here is we're trying to keep the formatting as simple as possible. We're trying to make sure that we're using consistent styles that we apply consistently, so that it's very easy for our editor to navigate our document, to see the structure of our document at first glance, and makes it very easy for the designer to then take your manuscript, import that into the design software without any complicated formatting, and then start applying their design expertise to it. So my goal here was to really just give you some tips that are ultimately going to save you time and save your editor time and save your designer time, so that you and they can instead focus on making sure that your book, your manuscript, your ideas, your message are as clear and as compelling as possible. And I hope I've achieved that. Now, remember this. Word and other text editors have many other great features and lots of bells and whistles. But here's the thing. When setting up and formatting your manuscript, the simpler the better. During publishing, your book will be designed in an altogether different purpose-built software package. So any formatting, fancy or otherwise, will just get stripped out by your designer anyway. Instead, focus on clarity, simplicity, and ease of use. And of course, on making sure that your message comes through the way you want it to. Make sense? Let me know if you found this helpful by liking this video and leaving a comment below. And if you have any questions at all about any of this, you can leave those in the comments as well. Happy writing!